This episode of All About the Gear is brought to you by BorrowLenses.com, who also provided the equipment we're reviewing today.
All right, folks, welcome back to another exciting episode of All About the Gear. I'm sitting here with my co-host for the show, Mr. Doug K. And today he's got a nice honking piece of metal in his hands for us to talk about. It's none other than the Canon 7D Mark II DSLR APS-C sensor. This is a real, quote, camera. So we're going to talk about the ins and outs of this thing, how much it costs, what it can do that other Canon DSLRs can't do, who it's for, and all that good stuff. Doug K., you got the Canon 7D Mark II in your hands. You've been shooting with it for several days. Have you fallen in love with it? What do you think?
No, I haven't fallen in love with it. Here it is. It's like you say, it's like a real camera.
Yeah,
you know?
Look at that. Look at that.
And it's good and bad, but I got to tell you, this seems to happen on a lot of our shows. We set out to review a camera, but there are other issues that have to be addressed. And
of course.
And I know we're going to upset some Canon people, but we're going to have to get into not so much DSLR versus mirrorless, but what is happening to Canon and Nikon versus the rest of the manufacturers. And you'll see where we're going with that, because this camera they've improved some things, but there are some things that I think Canon just doesn't get yet. For example, let's talk about this.
Yes.
All right, so as you said, this is a 20 megapixel APS-C sensor. It is supposedly the successor to the 7D, which was a marvelous camera, but that was 5 years ago.
Yeah.
To be on a 5-year update cycle when we have manufacturers like Panasonic Lumix and Sony, they're updating multiple times per year. Now, that bothers some people too, but my goodness, I expected more. More in this camera.
Yeah, these other guys are updating multiple times per quarter in some cases. I mean, you look at the life cycle of taking Sony as a case study, from the A7, the introduction of the A7, which was that was less than a year ago.
That's a year ago, yeah.
That was less than a year ago that they announced that thing, and now there's the A7. Well, they announced the A7 and A7R. Then there was the A7S came out. So we had the Trio, and then most recently they just announced the A7 II that's coming out. So yeah, so I don't get it, because they're all using similar parts, right?
Well, I mean, and they're but they're adding real features to the camera, and this camera has some new features, but when we get into it, we get into the discussion, I think we should probably try and go through it fairly quickly, because I think the bigger discussion is an important one.
Okay. Well, let's dive into it. So the basics are, how much is this camera again?
It's $1,800, which means it's a fairly pricey camera, $2,150 with a kit lens.
Okay. All right. So let's talk about the body and the controls of this thing. So I'm looking at it now. I've got a picture on the screen. You've got that one up. So it looks like a DSLR, right? So it's a traditional sort of DSLR. I see the PASM dial. I see an LCD on the top, the shutter button. What's different about this versus its predecessor?
Relatively little. It is traditional Canon. If you are used to using a 5D Mark III, for example, this camera will feel almost identical. It's smaller. It's very slightly smaller than a 5D. It's slightly lighter, but the controls are all in the same place with very few exceptions. It has the same feel. Now, the camera feels really good, so that's an important thing to consider. It has a nice grip. Some people complain it's a little bit too deep, but I have no problem. Well, it's a little deep, yeah. I have no real problem with it.
Mm-hmm.
The controls, like I say, are pretty much the same, right down to the quick menu and so forth. It's weather sealed, more than the original 7D was weather sealed. It actually has, real gaskets around the battery door and things like that. But the shutter is pretty nice. It's quiet. It's solid. It's fast. It has a real nice feel when you take a picture. That part of it is really
deliberate.
Nice.
Yeah, that's what I loved about DSLRs, or I love about them, is the fact that it feels deliberate when you take a shot. I mean, it's
and this is a very solid camera. It feels, it's both it's both light and solid at the same time. You feel like it's made out of really strong composite materials or something like that.
Yeah.
And it's nice to shoot with if you don't mind the size. And that's it. It's got the pop-up flash. It's got one thing that I still don't get from a lot of these manufacturers, and that is the card slots. Okay, so it's got an SD slot and a CF slot. Now that's a trendy thing. Some of the big cameras have a CF slot and an XQD slot.
Yeah.
I just don't get that, because it means if you want any redundancy, you have to carry two kinds of cards.
Right.
So to me, it's a backwards kind of thing.
So my thoughts were just that, you know, SD was the future, quote, and CF was the past, and that these sort of middle ground cameras that had both slots were designed to allow you to enjoy the best of both worlds while you needed to have a foot in both camps.
Yeah, I don't really know. I think, though, that the SD card was, you know, they could make it smaller, so they did, and that it was more adopted by amateurs and enthusiasts, but the pros stayed with the CFs. And part of that is that the CFs are harder to lose, and they're a little stronger. I had an SD card fall apart on me the other day.
Yeah,
Never
me too.
happened before.
Me too. I've had one, kind of disintegrate in my hands.
Yeah.
But then, you know, the other side of that is, you know, I'm not familiar with a lot of Windows portable machines, but on my MacBook Pros, they have an SD card slot on there, which arguably is awesome for pros to not have to carry a reader around with you. You just pop open your computer, stick the thing in, ingest your images, and you're off into the races without digging in your bag for the right reader in order to do that.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I'm perfectly happy to use SD cards. The only time I use a CF is when I have to use the big Nikon that only takes a CF.
Yeah. So let's more about this camera. So the body and controls you talked. I'm looking in your notes here. You said it's got a joystick on it. What's
the regular Canon thing? I call it a joystick. They call it.
Okay, got it.
Thing.
So it doesn't have an Atari 2600 joystick sticking out.
No, it's just that some of the operations require that you move this little thing around left and right, up and down.
Yeah.
And you know that's Canon standard, has been for quite a while.
See, if they're really cool, they'd install Pac-Man on that thing and allow you.
There you go. What are you doing? Are you taking pictures? No, I'm just playing an old video.
I'm trying to eat some ghosts, man. Leave me alone.
And it's got, good stuff. It's got USB 3, which is nice. It's got, Nikon style minimum shutter speed for auto ISO, which is great. It's got a lot of nice features like that. 10 frames a second, continuous, which is really pretty good in this class of camera, which means it's not up there with the 5D or the 1DX. So 10 frames a second makes it pretty good. ISO in terms of noise, up to about 6400, it's good, which puts it again sort of one stop slower than the 5D and one stop faster than the 70D. So the sensor is really nicely positioned in terms of ISO and noise in the Canon product line.
Yeah, but all that together adds up and points to one direction, right? So the overall image quality of this thing, does that stuff kind of add up to your standard, I'm shooting landscapes with this baby?
I was disappointed. Now, I'm using the kit lens. I didn't try it with any of the high-end Canon glass, but I thought the images were sort of flat, not too crisp, and highlights tended to blow out more than I thought they should. The dynamic range wasn't great. So I checked a couple of other places. I went to DxOMark, which is of questionable value. They didn't particularly rate the sensor all that highly. I looked at some other reviews that are more technical than what we do here, and they sort of agreed with me. They said, this is not really state of the art. It's not up there even with the Nikon sensors or the Sony sensors. So.
But you can't, in defense of this camera, you are shooting with the A7S and the A7, which are in a different sort of technological ballpark entirely from this thing. So you can't compare watermelons to grapes.
Yeah,
right?
But that's the problem. Why should a camera here that's $1,800 not be at least as good as a camera that costs maybe substantially less?
Yeah.
So there are goods and bads, but image quality is not the strength of this camera. I think, if anything, it's the autofocus.
Okay.
And let's talk about that for a second, because
that's funny though. I mean, that is a very poignant phrase that you just said. Image quality is not the strength of this camera. that's the whole point of a camera is image quality, right? It's like saying, hey, I bought this cool sports car, but it doesn't go very fast, and sometimes it starts up, sometimes it doesn't, but those aren't its strengths.
Well, you have to have it all. You have to have image quality. For most applications, you have to have autofocus, because what good is an image with great dynamic range if it's out of focus?
Correct.
So you've got to have all the pieces.
Yeah.
And image quality is not the strength of the camera. I think a lot of people will be happy with it, and there are a lot of shots. Let's say you're shooting sports. This is a great camera for shooting sports.
Mm-hmm.
There are shots that will look very good on this camera, because if you shoot them with some other camera, they'll be out of focus.
Right.
So you're trading one thing for another. I don't think you should have to make that trade-off, but this is a case where they have excellent autofocus. I'm not saying it comes at the expense of image quality, but the image quality just isn't quite there. And
why is the AF so good on this?
They've done a couple of things. One is they took, let's remember, there are two completely different parts to autofocus. There's in the mirror mode, which is still images, not in live view. In this case, they have a really good autofocus sensor that they've improved over the years for still images. It's got phase detection, good processing. It's really fast, very accurate.
Mm-hmm.
And then in live view and video, you use the image sensor for focusing, and in that case, they've used the same technology from the 70D, which is their dual pixel technology we talked about in that review, and we won't go into the details, but it makes for very good focusing on the image sensor. Again, that comes in when you're focusing in live view or if you're focusing in video mode. So good autofocus across the board on this camera.
Okay. All right. So high marks on that. Good. What else?
It's got what people always want to know about the display. The camera has a rear LCD, of course, but it is neither tiltable nor touchable. I think Canon in this case is going for the concept that this is supposed to be a more rugged camera, and that they don't want that tiltable LCD, which is a vulnerable thing when it comes to being knocked around or something like that.
Yeah.
Because the camera is really solid. I have to give them that. It's physical.
Is it weather sealed?
Yeah, it's got pretty good weather sealing. It may not be, it's not up there with the 1DX level, but I think this is probably a very good camera to be out in the elements with. Video, 1080p at 60 frames per second, nothing to write home about, but it does the basics. It's a pretty good video camera, and it's got HDMI outs, external mic outs, headphone jack.
So you could use it. You could use it to make your short documentary and that sort of thing, right?
Yeah, but this is a case where got to look at the 70D, which has an articulating screen. I think anybody who shoots video, well, you shoot a lot of video.
I do.
And I think the value of a screen, at least one that tilts and hopefully one that articulates. Here, having it fixed onto the back of the body makes this a little less useful as a video camera, I would say.
Yeah, it's funny. It's funny how technology and different innovations change your perception. Because I don't know that I mean, I could obviously, but I don't know that I'd want to go back to a camera that didn't have some sort of articulation on the LCD. Like my GH4/3 cameras have the fully articulated LCD, and the GX7 has the kind of like yours with the the one-axis kind of tilting LCD on there, and I've come to rely on those. The only time that I don't need that is when I'm using a little point and shoot or my iPhone, which is inherently tiltable. Right? So I don't know. All right, what about other things on this? Like, so we talked about the video. One thing we always talk about is the internal connectivity and the wireless and that sort of thing. Does it have that?
They've done some interesting things here. They don't have Wi-Fi or NFC in this, but they did put GPS in the camera. And that's a sort of an odd decision, because nowadays those of us who want geotagging are pretty used to doing this with a mobile phone and then syncing them after the fact with various apps.
Yeah, right.
So that's really not so bad. And of course, GPS is going to suck battery life out of these things.
So they didn't put Wi-Fi or NFC in it, and instead put GPS in it.
That is correct. Another one of these. In other words, what were they thinking? Kind of.
Yeah. What's up with that? Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, and I don't know the answer to these things. I don't have any friends at Canon I can call, but it just seems like a strange set of priorities. Now, some people say, the Wi-Fi is hard because of the metal casing, but hey, they got GPS in the thing. Why can't they get Wi-Fi in it?
I have to believe I'm gonna move into the camp of the glass is half full, and these kind of strange moves by Canon, etc. I'm thinking that they're playing this giant game of chess, and they're moving their pieces around, which to us, because we're not good chess players, we have no idea what they're doing, but in 2015, they're going to say checkmate, and all will be revealed, and we will see what they were doing with all these crazy moves.
Well, I hope you're right. We're recording this in early December, and there are rumors floating around about a 50 megapixel mirrorless camera from Canon.
Awesome.
In 2015. And I'd love to see them jump in and do something really innovative and so forth, but these cameras are just, I don't think Canon is listening. I don't get the feeling that they even care. They're continuing to make improvements to their old camera line, but I'm not sure they're making the improvements in the right areas for people. Now, if you're a Canon user, this might be a good camera for you, but it's not one that's going to make anybody go to Canon, that I would think.
Yeah, and I seen your list here. It's got USB 3, so that's good.
That's exciting. But I can also take the card out and put it into a USB 3 reader. So
there's that, or take the SD out and plug it directly into your computer.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah. So.
All right. Well, who's in the ring with this, guys? Who's the competition?
Yeah, and that's, I think, where we're going to really see what's going on here. So remember that this camera, body only, is $1,800. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So for almost half of that, for $1,000, you can get a 70D. Mm-hmm. Now, the 70D is still 20 megapixels. It's still APS-C. Has the articulating LCD. I think that the 70D is probably a better camera for video. Maybe it's one stop worse in terms of ISO and noise, but that's not the end of the world for most people. Yeah. It has the same dual pixel autofocus system in LiveView and video. I think this is a better autofocusing camera for still shots using the primary autofocus sensor. But still, to save $800 off an $1,800 camera, that's a big thing.
You could use that extra change and go buy a lens or something.
You absolutely can. But look at this. Look at Nikon's top APS-C camera. That's the Nikon D7100. Mm-hmm. That camera is half the price of this, $900 instead of $1,800 body only. Wow. It's got good autofocus. It's only 6 frames per second instead of 10. That's one of the things you're giving up there. Mm-hmm. It's not good for rapid shooting because it has a smaller buffer in terms of shooting rapid shots, and many of them in succession. Doesn't have the GPS, but it's half the price of this camera. And I think the D7100 image quality is substantially better than this camera.
Wow.
Okay. And I know there will be people who will disagree with me, but it's my show.
There you go.
So
it's my house.
Right. But then let's keep going.
Yeah.
Let's look at a Sony DSLR, the Alpha 77 Mark II, also $900. That thing shoots 12 frames a second, so that's even better when it comes to sports and action. Has great autofocus. That's been out for about 9 months or so. That's a great camera, and that has a gorgeous sensor as well. But wait, there's more. I want to compare these two cameras. Watch this. You know where I'm going.
What is that?
That is the Sony A6000. I can't even fit the Canon in there, right? All right. Sony A6000. All right. Small. We know that.
Yep.
That camera street price is now $450. That is 1/4. This camera is 1/4 the price of this camera, body only. All right.
Wow.
It's 24 megapixels. It also shoots 10 frames a second, actually 11. Actually it's APS-C, but it has what almost everybody considers to be a superior sensor.
Yeah.
It is not as rugged. It is not weather sealed, but I'll tell you, I took this to Iceland in the rain. I had no trouble with it. Mm-hmm. I think this camera is better in almost every way than this big camera, and it's $1/4 the price.
$450.
$450. Now, this camera is, a year old plus, so it's
Mm-hmm.
been around and it's been discounted. I think the original price was maybe $850. So you're looking at a brand new camera, which is selling pretty much near list or close to list, and one that's being discounted multiple times. But still, that's today's market. $450, $1,800. And if you're looking for a camera, if you've got an investment in Canon gear, okay, you don't have a choice. You've got to go in buy something that's going to take your lenses.
Yeah.
But if you're starting from scratch, I don't know why you would buy this camera, the 7D Mark II versus the Sony Alpha 6000. So,
Wow.
I mean, that's as strong a comparison as we've ever been able to make, a contrast, if you will. And it's not. We're not talking mirrorless versus DSLR here. We're not talking size. We're not talking all the, we're not talking about touch screen and that kind of stuff that you get a lot of flack for. We're just talking about quality for the value.
Yeah. Yeah. And which is the name of the game for anything that you're buying, right? And the name of the end of the end game for all of this is the image quality, or the, as cool kids say, the IQ, right? So you want to, who cares what camera body you use or what you ultimately choose to use? It's the art and the end result that you should be concerned with. And it sounds like, looking at this image that you have up here, for $1,800, I'm going to get less of that image quality / results / joy of photography than I would for $450.
Yeah, and like you say, $1,300 left for lenses.
$1,300, yeah, for lenses. All right, so I guess my last question was, who's this for? So do you want to put a fine cap on
and
it?
there are places where this would be a good camera. Don't get me wrong. It's still a good camera. I just am sort of shocked that Canon's so out of touch with the value curve, if you will. I think if you're an existing Canon user, particularly if you're shooting full frame like on a 5D, then this is a great second camera. It is going to give you the 1.5 magnification due to the crop factor, so you're getting the effect of a teleconverter on your lenses.
Yeah.
It's a good choice for people who are in the Canon ecosystem. It is particularly a good camera for people shooting sports, action, wildlife, motion. The camera performs very well in those chores. So if I were a Canon sports shooter and I wanted a second body, this is the one I would buy.
All right. Well, you can't get any more succinct than that.
Yeah, we're down to specifics, aren't we?
Yeah, we are. Oh, cool. That was an excellent review. I take it you're not taking that on your next trip with you.
No, I'm not.
You're not. All right. So what's coming up next on All About the Gear, Doug?
Again, thanks to Borrow Lenses for letting us get a hold of that so quickly after it came out.
Oh yeah, Borrow Lenses rocks.
They do. And so next is the Lytro Illume. I'm going to have that camera for 3 weeks and looking forward to it. And just remember, don't forget your red cyan glasses.
There you go. I looked for mine. I can't find them. You're gonna have to send me some.
All right, I'm gonna send you some more because we're gonna be all over that 3D stuff with the Lytro.
Yeah, the Lytro is the shoot first, ask questions later camera, right?
Good way to look at it.
Love it.
All right, Frederick, thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Doug. That's it for another episode of All About the Gear. We'll see you guys next time.